I fear no man, but that thing, it scares me.
No, I ain't talking about that freak, alright? He's not here, is he? How do we get this fucking thing off?
One shudders to imagine what inhuman thoughts lie within that helmet. What dreams of chronic and sustained cruelty. The Flamethrower, one of the great stratagems of Helldivers 2, a stratagem that coats the battlefield with a deadly inferno, clearing hordes of enemies with relative ease, especially when those enemies are stupid enough to walk straight into their own destruction. It is the go-to choice for any Helldiver who wishes to incinerate the tyrannical foes of Super Earth. But do you really know the Flamethrower? Because despite it being an effective horde clearing tool, the Flamethrower has much more to offer beyond this simple description. You see, it has an armor penetration score of 4, which puts it on par with weapons such as the autocannon, the anti-material rifle, and the big iron itself. This means the Flamethrower can kill every enemy in the game. However, unlike those other weapons, the Flamethrower doesn't deliver all of its damage in one nasty bullet. Nope, just like the other flame and gas weapons, its main shtick is that it is a sustained damage weapon. You have to hold it down and literally cook whatever is misfortunate enough to get in your way. Whether that's an enemy, a teammate, or some poor civilians. Trust me, this tragedy couldn't have been prevented in any way. In addition, the damage of the Flamethrower is a bit more complicated than just simple straight DPS, because the Flamethrower can have its base damage increased by 25% by unlocking the enhanced combustion ship module. And secondly, fire as a damage type sets the target on fire, which will burn them for an extra 50 damage per second, which can be applied to enemies either by direct exposure to the Flamethrower's fire or by having them stand on ground that has been set on fire. Because if you didn't know, Flamethrowers don't just materialize fire out of nowhere. No, they instead shoot out a highly flammable liquid that gets ignited by a pilot flame. This thing right here. That's why the Flamethrower has an initial ignition delay when firing it up. The pilot flame needs to be ignited. Now, as you've probably already guessed, the goal of the Flamethrower is to coat everything in flames. However, just holding it down and spraying it like crazy is a bit wasteful. So, you need to be strategic about it. Because there's no point in saving up a load if you're just gonna blow it over nothing. You need to make it count. So, you need to not only coat the enemies with your fiery substance, but also the ground beneath them, allowing the Flamethrower's projectile damage and its burn damage to spit roast the enemy. And even though Helldivers 2 says that the Flamethrower is, and I quote, an incendiary weapon for close range, you don't actually want to be chest to chest with your enemy, because the fire particles can be reflected back onto you. Furthermore, when firing the weapon, you're slowed considerably, which makes you a bit of a sitting duck. However, you do have about 16 meters of range to play with, so what you want to do is to be aware of where you are positioning on the battlefield. You want a nice open range, plenty of space, and for the enemies to be approaching from one direction, because your strongest form of movement with the Flamethrower is to back up. Enemies will run headlong into the fire without any form of self-preservation, so why should you help them close the distance, especially when that puts you in more danger? Also, you do need to be careful on how you move when firing the flamethrower, because diving in almost any direction will lead to you setting yourself on fire, which will lead to a lot of screaming and crying, and it's like, come on, it's a minor third-degree burn. Yes, your flesh is literally melting off your bones, but you've got fire-resistant armor on. Just walk it off and stop whinging, will ya? But speaking of danger, the Terminid front is a surprisingly challenging battlefield for the flamethrower to work within, even though by all accounts it shouldn't be that way. They are a horde army that are predominantly melee with low armor values. In theory, the bugs should be a flaming turkey shoot, but they're not. Because, unfortunately, the Terminids have many tools and abilities that disrupt your ability to use the flamethrower. Hunters and stalkers have their jumps, which allows them to rapidly reposition themselves, usually right in your face. Warriors, brood, and alpha commanders have their unnerving undeath ability, which gives them a significant speed boost after removing their heads. The spewer's acid spew not only outdamages the flamethrower, but also slows Helldivers when hit by it, and I don't think I need to explain what charges do. But that's only a taste of what the Terminids can do to ruin the flamethrower's flow. So, what should you do? Well, when bringing the flamethrower against the bugs, your key priorities during an engagement should be your positioning and your awareness, because the last thing you want to happen is to be flanked by more bugs. So, maintaining distance between you and your enemy is essential for survival. That means taking advantage of that 16-meter range. And remember to coat the ground in front of you. The extra damage will be of great assistance when culling large groups of Terminids. And when dealing with heavier units, you should prioritize their weak points. The flamethrower may have an AP score of 4, but targeting those areas will kill them quicker. However, it does mean you're going to be putting yourself in quite a bit of danger in order to target some of these areas, especially if those heavier units have some friends around. But fortunately, that's really the worst of it for the bugs. It's not like Arrowhead's going to add a new sub-faction that would drastically increase the difficulty of the Thank you, Arrowhead. I'm confident in saying that most players have just written off the flamethrower for the automaton front, because how can a weapon like that thrive against enemies that have high armor values and, most importantly, shoot back at you? The bots are the ranged faction. If you're out in the open with no cover, you die. Period. This puts the flamethrower at a terrible disadvantage, because it needs to get in close to be effective, and the last place you want to be is face to face with a tank. But that begs the question, how do you get it to work on such a front? Well, your best friend is crowd control. You must stop the automatons from shooting so that you can get in close and fry their circuits. This can be achieved in a number of ways, but I'd suggest a combination of gas grenades and concussive rounds. The gas grenades will confuse enemies within its radius, decreasing what little intelligence they had for about 10 seconds, giving you the opportunity to close the distance and burn them down. And the concussive rounds allow you to daze enemies briefly, which enables you to slowly creep forward towards them. But unlike the Terminids, where you want to be backing up most of the time, with the automatons you want to circle them instead. Evasive movement is key for fighting the bots with the flamethrower. Consistently breaking line of sight with them will keep you alive longer. It will also allow you to have a shot at their weak points, which are usually located on their backs. The The Illuminates are a unique enemy for the Flamethrower to face up against, because they are a mixture of both the Terminids and the Automatons. They are simultaneously a vast melee horde army and a resilient ranged elite faction. And it's when you are fighting both parts together that the squids are at their toughest. Because facing one or the other separately is a cakewalk. Either you move back defensively or charge in aggressively. But when meeting both parts on the battlefield, it becomes a delicate balancing act, where you can't be too aggressive too soon, otherwise the Voteless will tear you asunder, nor can you be too defensive for too long, otherwise the Overseers and the Harvesters will cut you down. So, what do? Well, you balance your approach. When facing a large horde of the Voteless, move back defensively while coating them and the ground in flames. Fortunately, they are not nearly as tanky as the bugs, which means they will go down pretty easily. When they have been taken care of, move over to dealing with the Staff Overseers. They too don't like fire, so perform a similar tactic. Once that's done, push up aggressively against the Harvesters. Now, you're going to want some arc resistance, because Harvesters will shock you up close. But once you're underneath the Harvester, like Bile Titans, you cook its underbelly. For elevated Overseers, I would just switch to your primary. They're already annoying enough as is, trying to cook one with the Flamethrower is a bit idiotic. But the Flamethrower doesn't need to excel at everything to be considered a great support weapon. It's versatile, has a great ammo economy, and can dish out some serious damage. And despite its perceived one-notedness as a fantastic horde clearing tool, and its limitations as a close-range sustained damage weapon, I've found that the Flamethrower will always find a way to rise above it all, to offer players much more than they bargained for. Whether you're dealing with vast hordes or robust tanks, the Flamethrower can handle it all if you're willing to work with it. That's why it's the go-to choice for any Helldiver who wishes to incinerate the tyrannical foes of Super Earth. And by embracing your pyromania, you will know the Flamethrower. A huge thank you goes out to Joe Plays Games and Demonic Unicorn 21 for lending their voices for this video. The links to their socials can be found in the description below. And another huge thank you goes out to the Helldivers Archive Discord server, for without whom this video would not be possible. Thank you for watching, remember to subscribe, and have a good one.